Good morning, everybody. Now, you might have noticed a bit of a change. I haven't got Motivational Monday. I've got Manage Your Critic Monday. And for some of you, that might be really obvious because you know that I'm the author of the book Manage Your Critic, From Overwhelm to Clarity in 7 Steps. You know that I'm just about writing Do, Delegate or Ditch, which is all about doing more of what you love, delegating the stuff you don't, and ditching the critic that says you can't. And so I realised it kind of made sense really for my Monday motivation to be more about managing your critic. So welcome to this episode where we're talking about how to manage loneliness. I'm really aware that some of you may be feeling lonely, but also maybe you know people who are lonely and you don't know yet how to support them in order to, when you're isolated, when you can't go and see them, you can't visit them, how can you support each other? Both, can you support yourself? How can you support each other when you are feeling lonely? So those of you just join me, please say hello, put a comment. I'd love you to be say hi to me. So we're live here on YouTube. We're also live on the Step by Step Listening business page, but we're also live in the Manager Critic community group where we can continue this private conversation once the video finishes today, which will be about 10 minutes. So what made me think about this was actually from a personal experience. I found myself on Saturday and Sunday talking to my husband, and I said to him, I just feel incredibly lonely. And it's really tough for somebody else to hear that, especially like the comment was, but we're here. Like my son and my husband were there at the dinner table, and I said it's not that I'm lonely here right in this moment, but I'm feeling incredibly lonely. And when luckily we have the questions and I can self-facilitate, so I ask myself, and this is the thing I want you to first of all, is the first thing to do when you've got any emotion, whether it's lonely, anger, sadness, joy, acknowledge it. And so by just noticing that I was feeling these different emotions, having had like a couple of weeks of being completely energized, loving doing the Make It Happen Motivator, getting ready for the next Do, Delegate or Ditch, which starts on the 1st of February, everything was great. And then I was feeling really, really, really lonely. So the first thing I want to do is acknowledge it. Excuse me, perhaps I've got some challenges with my voice. So the first thing I want to do is acknowledge it. So I acknowledged it and I could feel it in my body. It felt quite heavy. I felt myself wanting to cry, although I didn't really, but I just felt tears sort of welling up in the background. So the first thing to do with any of the emotion, whatever your emotion is to acknowledge it. The second thing is to accept it. One of the best ways to manage your own critic and to manage any emotion or any experience that's going on is accepting it for what it is. So in that moment, I was having this emotional response, and what I love about emotions is they're temporary, they're transient, and they too will pass. So just accepting this is my experience of the world. So I want you to think about your experience, accepting your experience. So if in this moment you're lonely, and what I know for people who are oversensitive, who are mindful of what the impact on others is, often you won't want to express how you're feeling because you think, well, it's a pointless talking about negative emotions, it's pointless mentioning how I feel, and then when other people kind of give you the feedback that isn't helpful, maybe they give you pity or they feel sorry for you, or worst case they start giving you loads of suggestions that won't work for you, then you can get into that position where you don't actually express how you're feeling. So the first thing is to acknowledge it. The second thing is to accept it. So if you can talk this out with somebody, it's great, but not everybody is resourced to hear that you're lonely or sad. They'll want to try and fix it. They'll want to make it better. So you may need to set them up for success and communicate to them that you just need to be able to express, you just need to acknowledge, and you need to accept how you're feeling right now, knowing that in the next moment you can change your focus and change the response. The third thing to do, once you've acknowledged it and you've accepted it, and so if you are the listener of somebody who is expressing loneliness, sadness, anger, often all that is needed is for it to be acknowledged, so you're lonely, and accept it, that is their experience, rather than trying to fix it or change it or make it better. Sometimes the only thing that needs to happen to manage the situation is for it to be honoured, for it to be witnessed. So if, having expressed and acknowledged and accepted that you are where you are with your emotions, nothing really changes, then what I would ask you to do is ask your emotion what it would like to have happen, or ask the emotion a few questions. So things that you might ask yourself might be, what kind of loneliness is it? Is there anything else about loneliness? Where is the loneliness? Does loneliness have a shape or size? And for me, it was definitely much behind my eyes, and it felt quite heavy in my heart. And when I actually explored what kind of loneliness it was, I was lonely in the business. Now, I have wonderful PA and I have wonderful Facebook manager, and I'm part of a gorgeous network of other business owners. So this is not about being alone. I've got lots of people who encourage me. I've got lots of people who will do things for me that I delegate things to. I've got lots of people to ask to do stuff. And so I'm not alone, but I was experiencing loneliness in the business. And so the thing I would say to you is, once you get clarity of what kind of loneliness it is, then I can ask that loneliness, what would you like to have happen? And when I asked my loneliness on the weekend, what would I like from it, is I wanted somebody to share the journey with. I wanted someone to share the experience. And I said, there's a difference between somebody that I talk about something to and tell them about it, to someone who I do it with. And obviously because of COVID, because of pandemic, some of the activities, so I've spent most of Saturday putting all the packs together for Make It Happen motivators, which I love doing. Right, so I had 17 certificates to write out, 17 thank you cards, 17 gifts to put together, and all the addresses to put on the envelope, and I absolutely love doing it. And it's not that I don't have time for it, it's not that I'm not capable of it, but what would normally have happened, non-COVID, non-pandemic, is my PA probably would have come over and her little boy George, and we would have had some music on and would have been doing it together, and it would have been a shared experience. And so what I discovered is, it just hit me on Saturday that I was missing, and we only do that probably once or twice a year, maybe, just really busy periods, but it was something that I've not had now for a year or so, and so I was aware of really missing that yesterday. And so the first thing is ask, and then the thing I'd say is assist. So one of the questions you might ask yourself is, so given what you want to have happen is, I want to share the journey. So that was my answer for myself. You might ask your emotion, what would you like to have happen? What would the emotion, so what would anger like to have happen? What would loneliness happen? So if we're focused on loneliness, what kind of loneliness is yours? And what would your loneliness like to have happen? So for me, it was about sharing the journey. So I spent a little bit of time about what kind of sharing, is there anything else about that sharing? And then you can start to think about how you can assist yourself. And so questions you might ask yourself is, so in order for me to share the journey, how do I need to be? And what I realise is I need to be upbeat, it needs to be fun for other people, it needs to be practical, it needs to be possible. So it was just my attitude had to be much more focused on what I wanted rather than what I didn't want. And when I checked in what kind of resource or support do I need, which is another question you can ask around assisting, is I realised that all I needed really was for my husband, instead of sitting in the other room watching telly on Saturday morning or going for his bike ride and doing his own thing, all I needed was for him to come into the workshop room and be with me, so that as I was going through stuff, if something funny happened or I remembered something from the course that really sort of brought me joy, I had somebody to share the experience with. And so he sat himself down, he read his book, he even had his headphones in, so he was listening to his book on audio and reading the book. So he wasn't like fully engaged with me, but he low enough that if I said anything, he could just look up and we could have a little chat about stuff. And I didn't really say very much for 2 or 3 hours while I was working. But every now and again he'd go, oh, you've done it, you're nearly halfway, because he knew I had 17 envelopes to do. So he was looking at the pile on the bottom, and just that little bit of support, that little bit of sharing helped ease that loneliness. Now I am aware that this may repeat again, it may be a pattern, so obviously there's also about me thinking about long term, but for Saturday in that moment it really helped. So I want to remind you again, whoever's on live, if you feel like saying hello, that's great. So if you're, for how to manage your loneliness, first of all, acknowledge it. Acknowledge what it is. So just notice that you are, that's what you're feeling, and that's the label that you're giving those emotions, that sensation, that experience. So first of all is acknowledge it. Second thing, accept it. So just be with that emotion. And some of the ways that I find by accepting is actually finding out what kind of emotion, where is it, and being curious about it. And if you can write about it or talk about it, that's often a way of acknowledging and accepting it. So you might write it in your journal, you might tell a friend, telling somebody else, obviously, if it is something like loneliness or anger, just be aware that when someone's listening to you, it can evoke emotion in them if they're caring, empathetic people who love you. So just set them up for success and let them know you're going through a particular process where you just want to acknowledge and accept this is your experience in this moment. So you can write it down, or you could talk to somebody about it. And then you might ask yourself some questions to get to know this emotion, and things like, what kind of, is there anything else? So what kind of loneliness? Is there anything else about loneliness? Where is it? You could ask, where does it come from? You could ask, does it have a shape or size? Or that loneliness is like what? And for me, it was just like a real sort of heavy blanket. I felt kind of like weighed down by it a bit, and a bit fed up and a bit cheesed off. And then once you've asked those questions, you can ask the emotion loneliness, what would loneliness like to have happen? And you can even ask yourself, given that's what loneliness wants, what would you like to have happen? And just be curious about the responses, whether they're similar or different. And so because actually, as I've said that to me, I'm thinking of my own thing is, what I wanted to have happen was to be resourced to get on with it, and to make a decision, which way am I going to go with the company? Am I going to grow it and have some kind of business partner? So I'm working with people. Is there some collaborations I can get involved in? That means I've got a joint project that I'm working on something with somebody that would help me to alleviate that loneliness. But if I ask loneliness in the moment, I want someone to share the journey with. And what I've realized is sharing the journey is not just telling people about stuff. It's about a physical connection. It's about physically seeing what's going on in my world. Lizzie's put, what do we do when we can't have what we want during lockdown? It's a really good question, and one of the questions that we use in the sort of under the ask section then of this sort of process that I've noticed myself doing. So I've accepted, acknowledged, then ask. So given that I can't have what I want, so if I use that, given I can't have what I want, I can't have my PA come here. All right, so what would work would be that I wouldn't be asking my husband to work in my business on the weekends. So he could have his time off, because he's worked Monday to Friday and he's working from sort of 8 a.m. till 4:35 every day. I would like him to have his time off. So given I can't have that, and the only people I can mingle with is my son and my husband, what would I like to have happen? So that's the question I always, given I can't have what I really want, what would I like to have happen, is a question that we have to pose ourselves. And I think in terms of managing your critic, it's important to encourage yourself to go there, because that's part of the acknowledging and accepting what is. Sometimes we can be so focused and frustrated that we can't have what we want, that we stay in that story of, it's not fair, I want this, I want that, which if it's serving you, keep doing it. But if you're feeling this stuckness, this is where the ditching that's the kind of letting go of and accepting that we can't have what we want. So given that, what we're going to do. So another example that came up for me this week, Lizzie, which is not quite, I think it's impacting the loneliness in the business. I think the loneliness in the business is because of the fact that I don't have like physical networking events. I don't have my PA working with me. I used to, when I ran my retreats, often sometimes I co-facilitated them. I used to go on 5-day retreats with Karen. So they weren't things I did all of the time. So I did a one retreat per year with Karen. My PA would come over once or twice a year. So I don't need to be doing stuff with people very often. That's what I've learned from this by just acknowledging it. But I think what's adding to it is that I'm also not seeing my friends, so I'm not seeing my family. So what's happening at the moment is because there's a kind of bit of an absence in the home life and the business life. I think that's why it hit me at the weekend. And so what I've come up with for myself is I realised, right, okay, so I might need to say to the boys every now and again on a Saturday morning, can someone come and do this with me, or will you? And it's not because I'm not capable of doing it on my own, and it's not because I don't want to do it, it's because I just want companionship. I want someone to share the experience with. But what I've realized is when I communicate it from that point of view, if I say, look, I'm very capable of doing it on my own, I'm very capable, I could pay someone to do it, but what I'd really like to have happen is to just share this with you. Could you come and sit with me for an hour while I did it, so I can chat to somebody while I'm doing it? And if they turned around and said no, then obviously I'd have to come up with a different strategy. So that was one part. The other part is the grandchildren. I'm really missing them. So I've come up with a strategy for that, in that I've decided that, you know, one of the things, I don't see them often, but when we do, we have lots of fun. So I'm going to create a video of me reading them a bedtime story. I've ordered some books, I've ordered some cuddly toys. I'm going to produce the videos here, and then I'm going to send them the toys and the books in the post, and then they can get the video from YouTube and they can watch Nanny reading them the bedtime story. So that will make me feel like I've got some connection with the grandchildren. I'm going to organise some fun nights with the Manager Critic community. So I'm realising that the loneliness in the business is being exacerbated by family time and also, you know, friendship time as well. And so I will take action to do something about those bits that I can control, which will alleviate the stuff that I can't control. So that's what would work for me. So my answer to you, Lizzie, is when you can't have what you want, what would you like to have happen, is the question that I would ask you. Encourage to go where you can't have. Move past frustration and grief to acceptance. Absolutely. And so just seeing that, those who haven't worked with me before, you'll know that I work on the 7 principles of motivated action. And so the first thing is why, you know, the purpose. What's the purpose for doing it? So what's my purpose for accepting and acknowledge where I am? What's the purpose of asking myself questions? What's the purpose of assisting myself or asking for assistance? The reason is because my purpose for doing it is because I get frustrated, and I don't want to be frustrated. I want to live a life of joy. I want to live a life I'm proud of. I want to be someone that's lovely to be around, and I don't want to be someone who's sad. But when I have got stuff that's sad, I need to give it some time. I just don't want it to consume all of my thinking. So that would be my purpose. And then what we talk about is the process. What gets you from where you are now to where you want to be? So for me, loneliness is some of it, depending on what the emotion was triggered for me, it wasn't a deep repeated emotion. It was just this sense of being on my own with something. But if it had been a grief, like a bereavement or a loss of somebody, then I might have given it more time. I might have allowed myself to be lonely or sad for a lot longer. So I'd be acknowledging that would be the process. Now you've talked about move past frustration and grief to acceptance. So if your process is moving past frustration and grief to acceptance, then for me it would be about, okay, what kind of frustration, what kind of grief, what kind of acceptance, what happens in between frustration and grief, what happens in between grief and acceptance. So when you start asking those kinds of questions of yourself and start to look at the sequential series of actions or behaviors that may have to occur to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And so for me, for the loneliness, it simply required a couple of hours of my husband's time to share that experience. For it not to reoccur, then I've realised I need to increase. One of the things, for example, Lizzie, is when we collectively as the community got together and somebody else organised the pamper events. Judith did that, and when Jenny did the quiz night, I didn't feel alone. I felt supported. I felt like other people were organising stuff and it wasn't all down to me, and I remember feeling completely lifted. So I also realised just in talking to you that some of for the loneliness to go away is I have to be able to ask for help. And I did notice that I was okay the first time, but asking people to do it again, I had my critic was sort of saying, oh, it's a bit of a liberty, but I've had the courage and I've asked them if it's okay, and I've been okay with if they say no. So that's the thing, is that this thing about getting assistance, getting help, is we have to have the courage to ask, and we have to manage that critic. Notice the stories that we're telling ourselves that may be stopping us from getting what we want. Find fun in other ways than human touch. Yes, but I have to say as well, I've been really, really intrigued with the thing that Jenny's doing in terms of getting photographs of times when you've hugged people, because I think, and also I just love her interpretation. So she sees hugs. I had a real sort of black and white, literal, it's just this, and physical touch. But I've realised that there's lots of different ways to connect with people. And we're going to have to get creative, aren't we? When we can't have human touch, we're going to have to find some other ways. So I've realized the touch isn't as much as the issue for me as it is the shared physical space. So there is some things I can do about that, in terms of I can do an isolated walk maybe, when lockdown's lifted a bit more. But yes, definitely. So seeing hugs, yeah. And the other thing I found about hugs is I remembered that my dad, I mean, obviously he used to wear this when I was younger, like Brute, the aftershave. So I did buy some for him Christmas. Then I thought, this is a bit weird giving it to him, because one, I'm not even going to see him. He probably doesn't even like it anymore. I'm sure his wife doesn't like it. So I actually kept it and just used the smell from the Brute to reconnect with my dad. So it's like, that's what I would smell when I gave him a hug. So it might even be remembering what smell people smell of. Have their favorite perfume maybe, and have it sprayed around so that their aftershave or whatever it is that person wears, that might be a way of reconnecting with the people when we can't have those hugs. Thank you for joining me today, Lizzie, whoever's on live. Hope you found today's useful. So I'm going to leave you there. It's now 9:20. So in order to manage your emotion, and particularly this one, loneliness, I've got a 4-step strategy. That's the process I worked out today. First of all, I have to acknowledge it. Then I have to accept it. Sometimes, I don't want to experience those. I don't want to feel like that, but it is what it is. That's my experience in the moment. Then ask questions to understand what it's like and what it would like to have happen, and then get assistance. Either how am I going to assist and support myself, or how am I going to get assistance from other people. And hope this has been of use to you. Please share with me below what you've got out of today's video. And if you are feeling lonely and you're not already in there, please come and join the Manage Your Critic community, where we are there to get creative, find solutions, and find ways to support each other through change, whatever that much change might be for you right now. Thanks ever so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.